He walked through the dry, crowded streets of Bal Fel, glad to be among so many strangers. In the wharfs of Vivek, he had no such anonymity. They knew him to be a smuggler, but here, he could be anyone. A lower-class peddler, perhaps. A student, even. Some people even pushed against him as he walked past, as if to say, "We would not dream of being so rude as to acknowledge that you don't belong here." Serene Relass was not in any of the taverns, but he knew she was somewhere. Perhaps behind a tenement window, or poking around in a dunghill for an exotic ingredient for some spell or another. He knew little of the ways of sorceresses, but that they always seemed to be doing something eccentric. Because of this prejudice, he nearly passed by the old Dunmer woman having a drink from a well. It was too prosaic, but he knew from the look of her that she was Serene Relass, the great sorceress. "I have gold for you," he said to her back, "if you will teach me the secret of breathing water." She turned around, a wide, wet grin stretched across her weathered features. "I ain't breathing it, boy. I'm just having a drink." "Don't mock me," he said stiffly. "Either you're Serene Relass, and you will teach me the spell of breathing water, or you aren't. Those are the only possibilities." "If you're going to learn to breathe water, you're going to have to learn there are more possibilities than that, boy. The School of Alteration is all about possibilities, changing patterns, making things be what they could be. Maybe I ain't Serene Relass, but I can teach you how to breathe water." She wiped her mouth dry. "Or maybe I am Serene Relass, and I won't. Or maybe even I can teach you to breathe water, but you can't learn." "I'll learn," he said, simply. "Why don't you just buy yourself a spell of water breathing, or a potion over at the Mages Guild?" she asked. "That's how it's generally done." "They're not powerful enough," he said. "I need to be underwater for a long time. I'm willing to pay whatever you ask, but I don't want any questions. I was told you could teach me." "What's your name, boy?" "That's a question," he replied. His name was Therian Winloth, but in Vivek they called him the Tollman. His job, such as it was collecting a percentage of the loot from the smugglers when they came into harbor to bring to his boss in the common Atong. Of the value of that percentage, he earned another percentage. In the end, it was very small indeed. He had scarcely any gold of his own, and what he had, he gave to Serene Relass. The lessons began that very day. The sorceress brought her pupil, who she simply called Boy, out to a low sandbank along the sea. "I will teach you a powerful spell for breathing water," she said, "but you must become a master of it. As with all spells and all skills, the more you practice, the better you get. But even that ain't enough. To achieve true mastery, you must understand what it is you're doing. It ain't simply enough to perform a perfect thrust of a blade. You must also know what you are doing and why." "That's common sense," said Theron. "Yes, it is," said Serene, closing her eyes. "But the spells of alteration are all about uncommon sense. The infinite possibilities, breaking the sky, swallowing space, dancing with time, setting ice on fire, believing that the unreal may become real. You must learn the rules of the cosmos and then break them." "That sounds very difficult," replied Theron, trying to keep a straight face. Serene pointed to the small silver fish darting along the water's edge. "They don't find it so. They breathe water just fine. But that's not magic. What I'm saying to you, boy, is that it is." For several weeks, Serene drilled her student, and the more he understood about what he was doing, and the more he practiced, the longer he could breathe underwater. When he found that he could cast the spell for as long as he needed, he thanked the sorceress and bade her farewell. "There is one last lesson I have to teach you," she said. "You must learn that desire is not enough. The world will end your spell no matter how good you are, and no matter how much you want it." "That's a lesson I'm happy not to learn," he said, and left at once for the short journey back to Vivek. The wharfs were much the same, with all the same smells, the same sounds, and the same characters. His boss had found a new tollman, he learned from his mates. They were still looking out for the smuggler ship Draugr, but they had given up hope of ever seeing it. Theron knew they would not. He had seen it sink from the wharf a long time ago. On a moonless night, he cast his spell and dove into the thrashing purple waves. He kept his mind on the world of possibilities. That books could sing, that green was blue, and that the water was air. Every stroke and kick brought him closer to a sunken ship filled with treasure. He felt magicka surge all around him as he pushed his way deeper down. Ahead, he saw a ghostly shadow of a Drung, its mast billowing in a wind of deep water currents. He also felt his spell begin to fade. He could break reality long enough to breathe water all the way back up to the surface, but not enough to reach the ship. The next night, he dove again, and this time the spell was stronger. He could see the vessel in detail, clouded over and dusted in sediment, the wound in its hull where it had struck the reef, and a glint of gold beckoning from within. But still, he felt reality closing in, and he had to surface. The third night, he made it into the steerage, past the bloated corpses of the sailors, nibbled and picked apart by the fish, their glassy eyes bulging, their mouths stretched open. Had they only known the spell, he thought briefly, but his mind was more occupied by the gold scattered along the floor, the boxes that contained them shattered. He considered scooping as much as he could carry into his pockets, but a sturdy iron box seemed to bespeak more treasures. On the wall was a row of keys. He took each down and tried it on the locked box, but none opened it. One key, however, was missing. Thalen looked around the room. Where could it be? His eyes went to the corpse of one of the sailors, floating in a dance of death not far from the box, his hands tightly clutching something. It was a key. When the ship had begun to sink, this sailor had evidently gone for the iron box. Whatever was in it had to be very valuable. Phelan took the sailor's key and opened the box. It was filled with broken glass. He rummaged around until he felt something solid and pulled out 2 flasks of some kind of wine. He smiled as he considered the foolishness of the poor alcoholic. This was what was important to the sailor, out of all the treasure in the Drung. Then, suddenly, Phelan Winloth felt reality. He had not been paying attention to the grim, tireless advance of the world on his spell. It was fading away, his ability to breathe water. There was no time to surface. There was no time to do anything. As he sucked in, his lungs filled with cold, briny water. A few days later, the smugglers working on the wharf came upon the drowned body of the former tollman. Finding a body in the water in Vivek was not in itself noteworthy, but the subject that they discussed over many bottles of Flynn was how did it happen that he drowned with 2 potions of water breathing in his hands. I was in the Rat in the Pot, a foreigner corner club in Aldrun, talking to my fellow rats when I first saw the woman. Now, Breton women are fairly common in the Rat in the Pot. As a breed, they seem inclined to wander far from their perches in High Rock. Old Breton women, however, are not so migratory, and the wizened old biddy drew attention to herself, wandering about the room, talking to everyone. Still, having noted her, I moved on to join my mates. Nimloth and Odiad were at their usual places, drinking their usual stuff. Odiad was showing off a prize he had picked up in some illicit manner, a colossal diamond, large as a baby's hand and clear as spring water. I was admiring it when I heard the creaking of old bones behind me. "Good day to you, friends," said the old woman. "My name is Abel Shredet, and I am in need of financial assistance to facilitate my transportation to Ald Redania." "You'll want to see the temple for charity," said Nimloth curtly. "I am not looking for charity," said Abel. "I'm looking to barter services." "Don't make me sick, old woman," laughed Odiad. "Did you say your name was Abel Shredet?" I asked. "Are you related to Abel Shredet, the High Rock alchemist?" "Extremely related," she said with a cackle. "We are the same person. Perhaps I could prepare you a potion in exchange for gold. I noticed that you have in your possession a very fine diamond. The magical qualities of diamonds are boundless." "Sorry, old woman. I ain't giving it up for magic. It was trouble enough stealing this one," said Odiad. "I've got a fence who'll trade it for gold." "But your fence will demand a certain percentage, will he not? What if I could give you a potion of invisibility in exchange? In return for that diamond, you could have the means to steal many more. A very fair exchange of services, I would say." "It would be, but I have no gold to give you," said Odiad. "I'll take what remains of the diamond after I've made the potion," said Abel. "If you took it to the Mages Guild, you'd have to supply all the other ingredients and pay for it as well. But I learned my craft in the wild, where no potion makers existed to dissolve diamonds into dust. When you must do it all by hand, by simple skill, you are blessed with remnants those fool potion makers at the guild simply swallow up." "That sounds all very nice," said Nimloth. "But how do we know your potion is going to work? If you make one potion, take the rest of Odiad's diamond, and leave, we won't know until you've gone whether the potion works or not." Trust is so rare these days. I suppose I could make 2 potions for you, and there'd still be a little bit of the diamond left for me. Not a lot, but perhaps enough to get me to Ald Redania. Then you could try the potion right here and now, and see if you're satisfied or not." "But," I interjected, "you can make one potion that works and one that doesn't, and take more of the diamond. She could even give you a slow-acting poison, and by the time she got to Ald Redania, you'd be dead." "Bleedin' Kinnereth, you Dunmer are suspicious. I will hardly have any diamond left, but I could make 2 potions of 2 doses each, so you can satisfy yourself that the potion works and has no negative effects. If you still don't trust me, come along with me to my table and witness my craft if you'd like." So it was decided that I would accompany Abel back to her table, where she had all her traveling bags full of herbs and minerals, to make certain that she was not making 2 different potions. It took nearly an hour of preparation, but she kindly allowed me to finish her half-filled flagon of wine while I watched her work. Splintering the diamond and powdering the pieces required the bulk of the time. Over and over again, she waved her gnarled hands over the gem, intoning ancient enchantments, breaking the facets of the stone into smaller and smaller pieces. Separately, she made pastes of minced bitter green, crushed red bulbs of Delarcos Bay, and driblets of Siciliani oil. I finished the wine. "Old woman," I finally said with a sigh, "how much longer is this going to take? I'm getting tired of watching you work." "The Mages Guild has fooled the populace into thinking alchemy is a science," she said. "But if you're tired, rest your eyes." My eyes closed, seemingly of their own volition, but there had been something in that wine, something that made me do what she asked. "I think I'll make up the potion as cakes. It's much more potent that way. Now, tell me, young man, what will your friends do once I give them the potion? Mug you in the street afterwards to retrieve the rest of the diamond, I said simply. I didn't want to tell the truth, but there it was. I thought so, but I wanted to be certain. You may open your eyes now. I opened my eyes. Abel had made a small presentation on a wooden platter. 2 small cakes and a silver cutting knife. Pick up the cakes and bring them to the table, said Abel. And don't say anything, except to agree with whatever I say. I did as I was told. It was a curious sensation. I didn't really mind being her puppet. Of course, in retrospect, I resent it, but it seemed perfectly natural at the time to obey, without question. Abel handed the cakes to Odiad, and I dutifully verified that both cakes were made the same way. She suggested that he cut one of the cakes in half, and she would take one piece and he'd take the other, just so that he would know that they worked and weren't poisoned. Odiad thought it was a good idea and used Abel's knife to cut the cake. Abel took the piece on the left and popped it into her mouth. Odiad took the piece on the right and swallowed it more cautiously. Abel and all the bags she was carrying vanished from sight almost instantly. Nothing happened to Odiad. "Why did it work for the witch and not for me?" cried Odiad. "Because the diamond dust was only on the left-hand side of the blade," said the old alchemist through me. I felt her control lessening as the distance grew, and she hurried invisibly down the dark Alderaan street, away from the rat in the pot. We never found Abel Shredet or the diamond. Whether she completed her pilgrimage to Aldredania is anyone's guess. The cakes had no effect, except to give Odiad a bad case of droops that lasted for nearly a week. The last time I saw the old Argonian, I was taken by how alive he seemed, even though he was in the throes of death. "The secret," he said, "of staying alive is not in running away, but swimming directly at danger. Catches it off guard." "Is that how you managed to find this claw?" I asked, brandishing the small carving as if it were a weapon. I had found it among his possessions, which I was helping him to divvy amongst his beneficiaries. "Should it also go to your cousin?" At this, his mouth widened, exposing his fangs. If I hadn't known him as long as I had, I would think he was snarling, but I knew that to be a smile. He croaked a few times, attempting laughter, but ended up wheezing and coughing, his rancid blood spraying across the bed sheets. "Do you know what that is?" he asked between coughing fits. "I've heard stories," I answered. "The same as you. Looks like one of the claws for opening the ceiling doors in the ancient crypts. I've never seen one myself before." "Then you know, I would only wish that thing upon a mortal enemy. Giving it to my cousin would just be encouraging him to run into one of those burrows and get split by a Draugr blade." "So you want me to have it then?" I joked. "Where did you even get this?" "My kind can find things your people assumed were gone. Drop something to the bottom of a lake and a Nord will never see it again. Amazing what you can find along the bottoms." He was staring at the ceiling now, but the way his fogged eyes darted around, I could tell he was seeing his memories instead of the cracked stone above us. "Did you ever try to use it?" I whispered to him, hoping he could hear me through his fog. "Of course," he snapped, suddenly lucid. His eyes widened and fixed on me. "Where do you think I got this?" he barked, tearing his tunic open to show a white scar forming a large star-shaped knot in the scales beneath his right shoulder. "Blasted Draugr got the drop on me. Just too many of them." I felt awful, since I knew how much he hated talking about the battles he had been in. To him, it was enough that he had survived, and any stories would amount to boasting. We both sat quietly for several minutes, his labored breathing the only sound. He was the one to break the silence. "You know what always bothered me?" he asked. "Why they even bothered with the symbols." "The what?" "The symbols, you fool. Look at the claw." I turned it over in my hand. Sure enough, etched into the face were 3 animals: a bear, an owl, and some kind of insect. "What do the symbols mean, Durkaza?" "The sealing doors. It's not enough just to have the claw. They're made of massive stone wheels that must align with the claw's symbol before they will open. It's a sort of lock, I suppose. But I didn't know why they bothered with them. If you had the claw, you also had the symbols to open the door. So why?" He was broken up by a coughing fit. It was the most I had heard him speak in months, but I could tell how much of a struggle it was. I knew his mind, though, and helped the thought along. Why even have a combination if you're going to write it on the key? Exactly. But as I lay bleeding on that floor, I figured it out. The Draugr are relentless, but far from clever. Once I was downed, they continued shuffling about, to no aim, no direction, bumping against one another in the walls. So the symbols on the doors weren't meant to be another lock, just a way of ensuring the person entering was actually alive and had a functioning mind. Then the doors were never meant to keep people out. They were meant to keep the Draugr in. And with that, he fell back asleep. When he awoke several days later, he refused to talk about the Draugr at all, and would only wince and clutch his shoulder if I tried to bring them up. By the time she was 16, Minerva Aeolos had been an unwelcome guest in every shop and manor in Belmora. Sometimes she would take everything of value within. Other times it was enough to experience the pure pleasure of finding a way past the locks and traps. In either situation, she would leave a pair of dice in a prominent location as her calling card to let the owners know who had burgled them. The mysterious ghost became known to the locals as Chance. A typical conversation in Belmora at this time. "My dear, whatever happened to that marvelous necklace of yours?" "My dear, it was taken by Chance." The only time when Chance disliked her hobby was when she miscalculated and she came upon an owner or a guard. So far, she had never been caught or even seen, but dozens of times she had uncomfortably close encounters. There came a day when she felt it was time to expand her reach. She considered going to Vivek or Nisus, but one night at the 8 Plates, she heard the tale of the Haran ancestral tomb, an ancient tomb filled with traps and possessing hundreds of years of the Haran family treasures. The idea of breaking the spell of the Haran tomb and gaining the fortune within appealed to Chance, but facing the Guardians was outside of her experience. While she was considering her options, she saw Ulster Moresby sitting at a table nearby, by himself as usual. He was a huge brute of a Breton who had a reputation as a gentle eccentric, a great warrior who had gone mad and paid more attention to the voices in his head than the world around him. If she must have a partner in this enterprise, Chance decided this man would be perfect. He would not demand or understand the concept of getting an equal share of the booty. If worse came to worse, he would not be missed if the inhabitants of the Heron Tomb were too much for him, or if Chance found his company tiresome and elected to leave him behind. Ulster, I don't think we've ever met, but my name is Minerva, she said, approaching the table. I'm fancying a trip to the Huron ancestral tomb. If you think you could handle the monsters, I could take care of unlocking doors and popping traps. What do you think? The Breton took a moment to reply, as if considering the counsel of the voices in his head. Finally, he nodded his head in the affirmative, mumbling, yes, proper rock, hot steel, chitin, walls beyond doors, 53, 2 months and back. Splendid, said Chance, not the least put off by his rambling. We'll leave early tomorrow. When Chance met Ulster the next morning, he was wearing chitin armor and had armed himself with an unusual blade that glowed faintly of enchantment. As they began their trek, she tried to engage him in conversation, but his responses were so nonsensical that she quickly abandoned the attempts. A sudden rainstorm swelled over the plain, dousing them, but as she was wearing no armor and Ulster was wearing slick chitin, their progress was not impeded. Into the dark recesses of the Huron tomb they delved. Her instincts had been correct. They made very good partners. She recognized the ancient snapwire traps, deadfalls, and brittle backs before they were triggered, and cracked all manners of lock. Simple tumbler, combination, twisted hasp, double catch, varieties from antiquity with no modern names, rusted heaps that would have been dangerous to open even if one possessed the actual key. Ulster, for his part, slew scores of bizarre fiends, the likes of which Chance, a city girl, had never seen before. His enchanted blade's spell of fire was particularly effective against the frost atronachs. He even saved her when she lost her footing and nearly plummeted into a shadowy crack in the floor. Not to hurt thyself, he said, his face showing genuine concern. There are walls beyond doors, and 53. Drain ring. 2 months and back. Proper rock. Come, Mother Chance. Chance had not been listening to much of Ulster's babbling, but when he said Chance, she was startled. She had introduced herself to him as Minerva. Could it be that the peasants were right, and that when madmen spoke, they were talking to the Daedra prince, Sheogorath, who gave them advice and information beyond their kin? Or was it rather, more sensibly, that Ulster was merely repeating what he had heard tell of in Balmora, where in recent years, Chance had become synonymous with lockpicking? As the two continued on, Chance thought of Ulster's mumblings. He had said chitin when they met, as if it had just occurred to him, and the chitin armor that he wore had proven useful. Likewise, hot steel. What could walls beyond doors mean? Or 2 months and back? What numbered 53? The notion that Ulster possessed secret knowledge about her and the tomb they were in began to unnerve Chance. She made up her mind then to abandon her companion once the treasure had been found. He had cut through the living and undead guardians of the dungeon. If she merely left by the path they had entered, she would be safe without a defender. One phrase he had said made perfect sense to her. Drain ring. At one of the manors in Balmora, she had picked up a ring purely because she thought it was pretty. It was not until later that she discovered that it could be used to sap other people's vitality. Could Ulster be aware of this? Would he be taken by surprise if she used it on him? She formulated her plan on how best to desert the Breton as they continued down the hall. Abruptly, the passage ended with a large metal door, secured by a golden lock. Using her pick, Chance snapped away the 2 tumblers and bolt, and swung the door open. The treasure of the Haran tomb was within. Chance quietly slipped her glove off her hand, exposing the ring as she stepped into the room. There were 53 bags of gold within. As she turned, the door closed between her and the Breton. On her side, it did not resemble a door anymore, but a wall. Walls beyond doors. For many days, Chance screamed and screamed as she tried to find a way out of the room. For some days after that, she listened dully to the laughter of Sheogorath within her own head. 2 months later, when Ulster returned, she was dead. He used a rock to prop open the door and remove the gold. We look down upon the beggars of the Empire. These lost souls are the poor and wretched of the land. Every city has its beggars. Most are so poor they have only the clothes on their backs. They eat the scraps the rest of us throw out, and we toss them a coin so that we don't have to think too long about their plight. Imagine my surprise when I heard the tale of the beggar prince. I could not imagine what a prince of beggars would be. Here is the tale I heard. It takes place in the First Age, when gods walked like men, and Draugr stalked the wilderness with impunity. It is a time before they were all confined to oblivion. There once was a man named Weedle, or maybe it was a woman. The story goes to great lengths to avoid declaring Weedle's gender. Weedle was the 13th child of a king in Valenwood. As such, Weedle was in no position to take the throne or even inherit much property or wealth. Weedle had left the palace to find independent fortune and glory. After many days of endless forest roads and tiny villages, Weedle came upon 3 men surrounding a beggar. The beggar was swaddled in rags from head to toe. No portion of the vagabond's body was visible. The men were intent on slaying the beggar. With a cry of rage and indignation, Weedle charged the men with sword drawn. Being simple townsfolk, armed with only pitchforks and scythes, they immediately fled from the armored figure with the shining sword. "Many thanks for saving me," wheezed the beggar from beneath the heap of foul rags. Weedle could barely stand the stench. "What is your name, wretch?" Weedle asked. "I am Namira." Unlike the townsfolk, Weedle was well learned. That name meant nothing to them, but to Weedle, it was an opportunity. "You are the Draugr Lord," Weedle exclaimed. "Why did you allow those men to harass you? You could have slain them all with a whisper." "I am pleased you recognize me. I am frequently reviled by townsfolk. It pleases me to be recognized for my attributes, if not for my name." Weedle knew that Namira was the Draugr Lord of all things gross and repulsive. Diseases such as leprosy and gangrene were her domain. Where others might have seen danger, Weedle saw opportunity. "O great Namira, let me apprentice myself to you. I ask only that you grant me powers to make my fortune and forge a name for myself that will live through the ages." "Nay, I make my way alone in the world. I have no need for an apprentice. Namira shambled off down the road. Weedle would not be put off. With a bound, Weedle was at Namira's heel, pressing the case for an apprenticeship. For 33 days and nights, Weedle kept up the debate. Namira said nothing, but Weedle's voice was ceaseless. Finally, on the 33rd day, Weedle was too hoarse to talk. Namira looked back on the suddenly silent figure. Weedle knelt in the mud at her feet, open hands raised in supplication.
It would seem you have completed your apprenticeship to me after all,
Namira declared.
I shall grant your request.
Weedle was overjoyed.
I grant you the power of disease. You may choose to be afflicted with any disease, changing them at will, so long as it has visible symptoms. However, you must always bear at least one. I grant you the power of pity. You may evoke pity in anyone that sees you. Finally, I grant you the power of disregard. You may cause others to disregard your presence.
Weedle was aghast. These were not boons from which a fortune could be made. They were curses, each awful in its own right, but together, they were unthinkable. How am I to make my fortune and forge a name for myself with these terrible gifts?
As you begged at my feet for 33 days and 33 nights, so shall you now beg for your fortune in the cities of men. Your name will become legendary among the beggars of Tamriel. The story of Weedle, the prince of beggars.
It was as Namira predicted. Weedle was an irresistible beggar. None could see the wretch without desperately wanting to toss a coin at the huddled form. However, Weedle also discovered that the power of disregard gave great access to the secrets of the realms. People unknowingly said important things where Weedle could hear them. Weedle grew to know the comings and goings of every citizen in the city. To this day, it is said that if you really want to know something, go ask the beggars. They have eyes and ears throughout the cities, and they know all the little secrets of the daily lives of its citizens. Late one night, a few seasons ago, a soldier was returning home after several bloody battles. He decided he would save some gold and cross the pine forest on foot. The first day of his journey was rather uneventful. The soldier stuck to the main path and kept at a brisk pace. When it started getting dark, he set up his bedroll, built a small fire, and cooked up some rabbit he had caught. A fine day indeed, he thought to himself as he fell asleep. Partway through the evening, the soldier was woken up by a soft sobbing in the distance. He grabbed his sword, assuming it to be a bandit trick, but pretended to sleep so he could get the jump on them. After a few minutes, the sobbing started moving away from his camp until he could no longer hear it. For the rest of the night, he slept with one eye open. Day 2, the soldier awoke from what rotten sleep he could catch and started off through the forest at a quicker pace, intending to put distance between himself and whatever he had heard last night. As the day went on, it began to rain heavy, so the soldier built himself a little shelter for the evening so he could remain dry while he slept. It took him a little longer to fall asleep with thoughts of the previous night fresh in his mind, but he eventually slept. This time, he awoke to sobbing that sounded like it was right outside his shelter. The soldier grabbed his sword and crawled out. In front of the fire, he saw the back of a ghostly woman, sobbing into her hands. The soldier mustered his courage and asked her what was wrong. No answer. He began to slowly approach, but before he could reach her, she turned and screamed at him. The ghostly woman raised an axe and began to run at the soldier, disappearing before she could make contact. The soldier took off into the night with just his sword in hand. He ran until the first light of dawn, where he started down the road again, as fast as he could move. The third day was bright and sunny, but the soldier, rattled and sleepless, didn't even notice. He moved as fast as he could, trying to get through the forest before nightfall. As darkness began to fall, he saw a cabin just off the road and thought to himself it would be a good place to hunker down for the night. After arriving at the cabin, he spent some time blocking the doors and windows. Nothing would get in. Despite his preparations, he could not sleep. He sat in what used to be the cabin's bedroom, staring at the barricaded door, shaking. Eventually, he could keep his eyes open no longer, and fell asleep. This time, he awoke to laughing on the other side of the barricaded door. It sounded like the woman from before, but he refused to believe it was her. The soldier burst through the barricaded door into the main room to find the ghostly woman from the night before, staring at the ground, laughing hysterically, with axe in hand. He began to relentlessly attack the ghostly woman, but he could feel his strikes were less effective. He used a scroll of firebolt, which drew a scream from her, and she exploded, disappearing. The ordeal was over. The ghost was gone. The soldier slept well that night, and the next day made excellent distance through the woods. As the sun began to set, he came out on the other side of the forest and looked back, remembering the days before. As he turned and started walking away from the woods, he could swear he heard sobbing again.